Hello again, I'm Matthew from thewetpen.com, and this review has been delayed for a couple of months, but I'm glad that I finally get to show this pen to you because it's really beautiful. I got this box in the mail in August, and as you can see, it's from the Epitome Pen Company. This model is the Epitome flagship called the Emerald, but this particular pen is a variation in an American acrylic. And this acrylic is gorgeous, with vibrant colors and a fine shimmer throughout. Here on the cap, you can see that the acrylic is a bright Caribbean blue on the front, and a darker blue and mostly green on the back. And all of that blends into a beautifully textured mid-blue on the pen body. It's full of sparkling ripples that give it some wonderful depth and complexity, and the overall impression reminds me of the ocean meeting the shore of a tropical green island. Let me show you the acrylic a little bit more closely. This deep texture in the blue is so nice. This resin comes from Starry Night Resins, which is a company based in Texas, and they're used by quite a few well-known pen makers here in the US. On the cap, between the blue and the green, there's a white area that looks like the surf. That's pretty awesome. At the bottom of the cap, there's a wide band that has Epitome engraved around the front, and the Epitome logo is on the back of the ring. The pen clip is a pretty standard Indian pen clip, and it works well, but there's no branding or anything else of interest. The top of the cap is flat and smooth. The cap unscrews nice and smoothly in about 2.5 turns, which is a bit more than I prefer, but it's not bad. The cap threads themselves are nicely made, and they're fine enough that you don't feel them at all when you grip the pen. The grip is a beautiful green, and it tapers gently down towards the nib, where it flares out again. The nib is an Epitome broad this time, and you can see the Epitome logo etched on there, along with the B to remind us of the tip size. If we turn it over, there's the feed, and it's a typical plastic feed. As you might have guessed, this pen uses a cartridge converter. It arrived with this Schmidt converter that just barely fits into the pen. Now, as I was originally making this video back in August, I thought that this was the right moment to do a bit of a writing sample. And I thought that Montblanc Lapis Lazuli ink might look good in this pen. So I filled the converter with ink and then went to install it into the pen. And then this happened.
What the?
Yes, the whole nib unit just popped out of the section. I thought that maybe it wasn't screwed in properly the first time, so I screwed it back in, but the same thing happened again. The threads in the grip section wouldn't hold in the nib unit, and they were getting worse. This was not a cheap pen, and it's not a review sample. I paid for it myself, so I contacted Epitome to see what could be done, and they were pretty good about it. We went through a process of trying different nib units to make sure that the problem was with the threads in the pen, and then they offered to replace the pen, but the pens in this particular acrylic were all sold out, so I'd have to go with a different model. I considered just gluing the nib unit into the section, but I didn't want to lose the ability to easily change those nib units. So I took some time off to consider my options, and when I returned from Europe, I thought that I had come up with a pretty good plan. I decided that I'd just use a little bit of epoxy, clear JB Weld in this case, on the threads inside of the grip section. Then my plan was to cover the nib unit in silicone grease and screw it into what was left of the threads to create new threads with the epoxy. My hope was that the silicone grease would allow me to unscrew the nib unit after the epoxy had cured. I have to apologize here that everything is out of focus while I'm doing this work. I wasn't paying any attention to the camera, but I got the epoxy onto the threads, the grease onto the nib unit, and the nib unit into the section, and I left it to cure. And then I completely failed to film it, but the next day, I gave the nib unit a twist, and it came free. But the threads were nice and strong. It seems to have worked. I've washed everything thoroughly, and I've tried a couple of nib units in the pen, and so far so good. So, let's see how this pen writes. And I am very happy to report that the pen works very nicely. This ink is Birmingham Electron, not the lapis lazuli, but the flow is excellent and the nib is wonderfully smooth. And it gives me a good broad line. I've had some trouble in the past with Indian nibs not giving me a true broad line, so that's really nice. Technically, the cap on this model does post, and although it's not deep, it is fairly secure. But it does throw off the balance of the pen, and that's unfortunate because the body of this pen is pretty short, and it's just at the cusp of being too small in my hand to be comfortable to write unposted. It works though, and I do find the grip section to be comfortable. Speaking of the size of this pen, let me show you how it compares to a couple of other pens. First, here's a Lamy All-Star. And on this side is my Lotus Everest, another gorgeous acrylic. Here's a tiny Pelikan M200, and here's a Moonman M800. So overall, I really like the Epitome Emerald. It's a great writer, but of course, it's the acrylic that really makes this pen. It's probably one of my favorite 2 or 3 that I own. The issue with the nib unit popping out seems to have been a fluke. Everyone at Epitome says that they've never seen it before in their pens, and I can't find anyone else having experienced it among my friends or on the internet in general. And of course, Epitome would have replaced the pen if I hadn't decided to fix it, so I'm not too worried about that for the future, though I wasn't especially happy about it when it happened. For the size of my hands, I do wish that the body of the pen were a little bit longer or that the cap posted deeper, but that's just a matter of personal taste. In the end, I really enjoy the pen, and I'm going to be keeping my eye on the Epitome website for future releases with resins from Starry Night or other resins like this. And I think that's about it for this pen, but let me know if you have any questions down in the comment section. My next video will be about some less expensive pens, and I also have a couple of ink videos to make. I'm expecting to review a brand new waterproof dye ink in the coming weeks, and I'm trying to decide whether to get an Inkvent calendar this year. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on those too, so subscribe if you're interested in this stuff, and don't forget about that like button down there. And that's it. Stay safe out there, everyone, and enjoy your fountain pens and inks. See you next time.